Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, I'm Tom Dillon, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Helen Leathers.
Hi, Tom.
Good morning. How are you?
You nearly stumbled over.
I nearly stumbled over your name, and I took my time. I paused before I said it, but I still struggled.
I'm good. I'm really good. How are you?
I'm very, very well. Thank you very much.
Good. Glad to hear it.
I was just thinking, we're up to episode 94.
This is
We're
episode
very
90.
nearly at episode 100. I'm getting very excited the closer we get to it.
Yeah.
So I think next time we get together to record some episodes, we'll be so close.
We will.
We'll be so close. Good. So what are we talking about today, Helen?
Well, I thought we would discuss intuition in coaching. And I thought we'd discuss this because I thought it'd be quite interesting for a number of reasons.
I'm actually slightly nervous because, we have very different opinions on intuition.
My first reason for thinking this would be interesting was that I think that you think we have very different opinions.
My
on
intuition
this.
is that we have different opinions.
Well, I think we might see some differences.
All right, then.
But
Let's
I don't
do it. Let's see where we go.
Yeah, I just don't think they're quite as polarised as you think.
All right, then.
And the second reason is because I often see or hear people say, I'm an intuitive coach. And I know that you will react to that on occasion.
Well, only because, I'll explain why. Because when I was on my first training program, I think it was my first one. Spent a year learning to coach, but I hadn't done an awful lot of coaching by then. And I remember sitting in the final session and kind of going around the room, a bit of a check-in in with how people were feeling about their coaching and what type of coach they were. And a lovely lady called Adele sat next to me and said, well, I think I'm an intuitive coach, but I think I always have been. And I was like, no, don't think you were, because actually when we started this process, you were asking lots of close questions, you were giving advice, you were doing everything that we all do when we start learning to coach. So you've definitely learnt some intuition about the coaching process. So you show up in a different way now but she had this belief that she was always an intuitive coach. So I kind of just rail against it a little bit.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd give you a bit of a backstory.
Thank you.
I know you weren't asking for one, but that's kind of...
No, it's good.
That's my map of the world.
Yeah, yeah. So I like to start with a definition when I look at topics.
And what's your definition of intuition, Helen?
So I pulled this off an online dictionary. And
not your definition at all, then?
Not my definition, no.
You found one?
I found this dictionary definition of intuition, which is the ability to understand something instinctively without the need for conscious reasoning.
Okay.
So that's the definition. And I will say, hands up, when I was younger, I would have said, follow your intuition regardless. Absolutely always follow it. However, I have, over the many years, refined my thinking on this. And much of that comes from studying psychology, from looking at research that I've encountered along the way.
Talking to me.
Talking to you. I'd started to refine this before. So now I have three kind of theories, if you like, or rules that I would say are my headlines around intuition. And I thought I might share them with you briefly and then we can explore them a little bit.
I'm keen to hear them.
Okay. So firstly, I think intuition is a spectrum and that there are different aspects of this spectrum, from animalistic gut instinct at one end right through to how the hell did you know that on the other end?
Okay.
Secondly, I'm a firm believer that if you suspect you might be in danger, and I'm sure there are lots of ladies that will resonate with this, and or your life depends on it, and or you have no time to think about it, go with your intuition. Basically, if your body says run, run.
Yeah. Well, I think if you think from a evolutionary perspective, we have survived as a species because we ran.
Yes.
You know, those people that heard a rustling in the trees, thought it was a rabbit, turned out to be a lion, and didn't run, they got eaten.
Yes.
So our
absolutely.
genetic line is,
Yeah. So I absolutely think if you haven't got time and you're scared, you've got that fear, go with it.
to be fair, it's not going to be a lion.
No, not in this instance. Well, not in the UK,
No.
certainly. However, if you have time to give it some thought, listen, acknowledge that intuitive response, do some really good thinking around it, and be prepared to accept or reject that response, do the thinking.
Okay.
And my third rule or headline is clean up your compass. Learn how the mind works. Do the work you need to do on yourself, around biases, around understanding your triggers, reducing stress and psychological trauma from your body. And that makes your intuition much more likely to be correct when you hear it, think about it, and choose whether or not to follow it. So they are my 3 kind of rules, if you like.
Good. So let's start at the beginning then.
Yep.
So your first rule was that intuition is a spectrum. So say more about that.
Yeah, so this is the way I see it. At one end of the spectrum, we have that gut reaction, the one we talked about just now, where that animalistic response to potential danger in order to keep us safe. So this is a survival bias, a better be safe than sorry. If you hear something when you're walking down a dark alley or something like that, you're best placed, in order to survive, you're best placed to think the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
So,
But I would say that for most of the time you're going to be wrong.
absolutely, that might be wrong a lot of the time. So at the moment, my spectrum is not about whether it's right or wrong. It's just a spectrum. But at that bottom end of the spectrum, our bodies become hyper alert. The mind goes to a worst case scenario, as I say. And it's to keep you alive. Because if, like you say, we ignore it and there is something there, we may not be alive.
Yeah, except that we live in a different world now where those animalistic instincts that keep us safe, we don't have need for them anymore. I fully accept, if you're a woman walking at night in the dark, yes, but for most of the time, when that fight or flight response kicks in, it's not about something that is life or death to us.
No, but that's still a case that that is a response. So on our spectrum of intuition, that's still going to be there, isn't it?
It's going to be there, but probably doesn't serve us well.
Yeah. Well, doesn't mean it's not there.
No, I said that it's there.
So then I think when this happens, when we get that instinctive response, it's quite loud, if you like, for want of a better word. It's our fight or flight. It's a big feeling in our body, and it's really, really getting our attention. And then we move further along the spectrum and we have this kind of middle ground, which is a bit of a quieter response, a sense of unease. And there are a number of reasons that this sort of quieter, intuitive niggle kicks in. And people think, oh, something's not quite right. Or they might start to notice things. And I think sometimes that's based on filters that we have, the values that we have, the biases, which we covered in a previous episode. Those biases impact how we perceive situations, past experiences, memories. Sometimes it's our imagination. Sometimes, though, those little niggles, those quiet moments of something's off, can be knowledge and experience. And even if all of that sits in our unconscious, our conscious mind is being nudged to say something's off here. And again, like the other end, the far end of the spectrum, we may be right, we may be wrong. Now, that is, I think, where your spectrum would end. But for me, I believe it goes on a little bit further, and there's this other end of the spectrum, which, perhaps we're not going to discuss today, but it's other end of the spectrum where things happen, we know things that we have no explanation for. And that is certainly a case for discussion, which perhaps is not, isn't the place.
Give us one example of what that might be.
So I have a few that I can think of, but I do remember one time when I was doing a training, I would walk around the room and ask each person their name and write their name on a little name card that the hotel provided, put it in front of them. So when I'd met everyone, introduced myself, and I walked up to this guy and said, "Good morning, I'm Helen. What's your name, Gary?" And he just looked at me and went, "Gary?" Now, you could say that's a coincidence. It was a bit weird. I had to then pretend I'd seen his name written down somewhere so that he didn't feel weird about this. But I hadn't, and I don't know why I did that. So there's an example of something at that far end of the spectrum where I just blurted it out and it happened to be true. And some people might think that that is an extension of intuition.
Yeah, and I suppose you could rationalise it and say that maybe he reminded you of someone else called Gary in the way that he looked. That might have led you to that.
And what were the chances of his name actually being Gary?
Well, it could just be a coincidence.
It could, yes. So, as I say, that end of the spectrum we differ on our opinions, I think.
Yeah.
But I think that the other two parts that I've mentioned, that animalistic gut reaction, that middle ground, which sometimes is right, sometimes is wrong, I think we might agree on quite a lot of the stuff that sits there. That's my thought on it.
Okay.
And we've talked before, like I say, we mentioned biases, and that can really influence that information that we have in that middle ground, because we will make meaning of a situation based on past experiences. Like you said just then, maybe someone reminds us of someone from our past, so we will attribute qualities to them that we don't know about because of the person they remind us of.
Yeah, so some projection of
So
qualities from someone else.
Yeah, so if we meet someone that reminds us of a person who lied to us, we're going to perhaps assume, I can't trust this person. So there is some crossover there with the things that we talk about in cognitive behavioural work around filters that we use to make meaning out of situations that can mean those feelings and those intuitive niggles can be wrong. But equally, if we think about our medical professionals that we work with, they're going to have experiences and knowledge in their unconscious and conscious mind that their brains are going to connect, and maybe their intuitive responses are going to be correct.
Yes.
And I think that's really important to remember.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. Yeah.
I told you.
Yeah.
I told you.
So no, and I think, so that's probably useful to give you my take on intuition. So I think where intuition is at its most useful is where you have some experience of what is going on. So if you are a medical professional and you have experience of seeing lots of patients with similar conditions, you're going to recognize the symptoms that show up in your consultations, and that will give you some intuition of thinking that you might know what is wrong with someone. You might not always be right, but you will have some intuition and that will guide you. But I think there's a danger too that in having lots of experience of maybe one condition, you start to see everything as being that condition. That when some symptoms match, you go, I know what this is because I've seen this before, without fully exploring it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think what comes to mind is there's a podcast that I listen to on BBC Sounds, actually, called Room 5. And there was, I think it was the very first episode of the series. And it was about, the episode was called Bex, because that was the name of the person they were talking about, and how she was a young woman who had some awful situations at university, and she had some seizures, and then she started going into psychosis. And she was sat in a ward in the hospital, and a neurologist walked through, and they spotted something about the way she was interacting with a toy penguin. And I think its name was Eddie. And the neurologist said, this isn't what you think it is. And they ran various tests, and it was a really, really rare form of encephalitis, which like you only get like 150 cases a year in the UK. But somewhere in his brain, they'd connected the one scenario where he'd seen the case many years before and this scenario, and he put them together, and this woman had treatment that potentially could have saved her life because of that intuitive response. And I think that it's really important that we don't deny that.
No. So, why would you?
Exactly. But I've also seen people who think they're intuitive, who've sort of read people, if you like, from their body language, facial expressions, and got it horribly wrong.
Yeah, because we can't possibly know what other people are thinking.
Yeah. So, as I say, I don't think that we have completely opposing views on intuition.
No, I don't think I've changed my views. I think I'm still of the opinion that we develop intuition by encountering situations repeatedly. So we build up a schema about what things look like, and we build up, if you think about our ability to read people to an extent, that becomes from having thousands of hours of interacting with other people and watching dramas where people behave in certain ways when they're doing things. And that might lead to a wrong sense of intuition where, I heard a lot of the theories around people lying. They'll cite certain things that people do when they're lying, but that's not always going to be the case. So I think we can have lots of intuition about people, noticing, calibrating people and their expressions, their body language, their gestures, and knowing when something's not congruent.
Yes.
And going, there's something off there. But I wouldn't possibly know what that was.
Yeah, I think that's a really good phrase, isn't it? That incongruence. If you see a look on someone's face that is different to what they're saying, or something, and you might
or
not
just
know.
Different to how they normally show up.
Yeah.
And you might, I guess the police interviewing, sort of, they tend to look for those sorts of things, those telltale signs, those poker players, they look for the tells, don't they? But we can't possibly know what's actually going on in someone's head.
Yeah, so we can notice that something's off, but we won't know why.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important as a coach, even if you call yourself an intuitive coach, that you don't put that meaning into the situation.
Yeah, so I think that comes back then to noticing what you're noticing.
Yes.
So if, as a coach, you notice someone start to look down at the ground whilst they're talking about something particular, just being able to notice that and, okay, something different happening there, and just being curious about that and asking about it is a better way to approach it than going, I'm intuiting that they are feeling sad about this because they've lowered their head, which is what people do when they're sad. So we have to not give ourselves, attribute ourselves with the gift of mind reading and being able to understand what's going on in someone's head. I don't think we're that clever.
So I asked ChatGPT what it knew about intuition in the coaching room.
Did you ask it to answer in the style of an English country gentleman?
What's he doing?
Sorry. People won't understand the reference.
No.
Richard Osman's latest novel,
We Solve Murders.
We Solve Murders, includes someone who is using ChatGPT to disguise his identity.
Yes.
And asks ChatGPT, reply in the style of an English country gentleman. Well, he's really a Londoner, talks like that.
I didn't do that. I just asked what it knew about intuition in coaching. So I thought I'd run it by you.
I think you should try that next time.
I will try that next time. Okay, I'll report back. So this is what ChatGPT said. Intuition in the coaching room is a vital element that can deepen the connection between coach and client, enhance decision-making, and facilitate transformational breakthroughs. It's often described as a coach's ability to sense what is beneath the surface, beyond what is explicitly said or seen, and to guide the coaching process accordingly.
Yeah, you see, that's where I think it gets it a bit wrong.
I think it's wrong.
Yeah.
And it talks then about deep listening and awareness and trusting the process. But I don't think that intuition is a vital element at all. I think that's it's a
Well, it depends what you're describing as intuition. If you're talking about that magical thinking of I know what lies under the surface here, then you're probably going to get it wrong most of the time. But I think if you think, okay, something's not right, my intuition is telling me that there's something going on under the surface, then I think you're right to kind of bring that up and go, I don't know why, but something's telling me there's something more to this going on. How do we explore that?
Yeah, and it goes on to talk about how intuition allows people to pick up on subtle cues, which is basically what you're saying. But I think that, if people are out there thinking, well, I'm not very intuitive, they might think, well, I can't be a good coach then. But actually, by learning to hold that space, be truly present, be listening to your client, you will develop rapport with them and you will have that sense of something being off.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that idea of calibrating. So if we're sitting with someone for an hour and a half at a time, maybe, over time we will start to recognize, if we're really paying attention, we will start to recognize different facial expressions, different body language, different gestures, different tones of voice. It's all of that, really noticing what you're noticing.
Yeah.
And being willing to notice what you're noticing to the coach, to tell them what you're noticing.
Yeah.
So I think if we do that, that's some intuition coming in, but without us thinking that we've got some magical power that allows us to know what's going on in someone else's head.
Yeah, so not assigning meaning, but just knowing, let's open up this conversation a little bit. And I think sometimes people can conflate intuition with assumptions.
Yes.
And
give me an example.
Well, I think on either side, as a coach, you might assume the meaning of something, but also the coachee might make some assumptions in their story or in the scenario they're describing. And they may think that they know the meaning of the situation. And I think what's lovely about coaching, and we've talked about it before, is that perspective taking and how we can help someone to, debate those assumptions and come up with a new version of their story. So I think...
Yeah, so I think we have to be careful as coaches not to make assumptions.
Absolutely.
And to lead the conversation in a certain way because we are making those assumptions, but also then to notice the assumptions that are coming out in the coach's story. So I think Nancy Klein refers to what people share as, they'll share facts, they'll share possible facts, and then they'll share just assumptions. And it's that being able to discern or be curious and go, so what is a fact in that? Or what is just an assumption? But recognizing that will come into play in their telling of the story.
Absolutely. And, I talked about cleaning up your compass, and what I mean by that, I actually stole the phrase from Martha Beck, I think, that...
Martha Beck of the Follow Your North Star.
Yes, yeah.
I guess there's quite a bit of intuition going on in her world, isn't there?
Yes, very much based on intuition. But I think if we do the work on ourselves, which we talk about all the time, we talked about in our episode on biases, we've talked about in transactional analysis, if we work on ourselves and we clean up our thinking around and understanding around our own biases, beliefs, values, where does this stuff come from for me, then we can start to have a clearer view of what's going on. We can start to remove the things that are going to tarnish those little intuitive niggles and maybe skew them. When we come to realise and know that when we meet someone perhaps who reminds us of an old boss or someone in our past that maybe we either did or didn't like, so we therefore treat them differently rather than just taking them on their face value, that understanding really cleans up our compass so we can explore our relationship with that person from a cleaner space without all of that additional layer. And I think it helps us to spot things and not attribute meaning to them because we've done the work on ourselves.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I guess, yes, in terms of us recognizing the biases that we might have and the kind of helpful thinking. But I think we still have to be very careful that in doing the work on ourselves, we think we then have a clearer picture of how someone else is thinking. Because they might well be making stuff up. They might be lying to us. They might be doing that self-serving bias thing of presenting themselves in a good light. And that's not the reality of the story. So I think we have to still be curious and explore what's going on for the coachee and challenge them on things that don't seem to quite ring true.
Absolutely. And I think that in doing that work on ourselves, what we then are able to see is that all of those things colour our interpretation of life and events, situations, etc. And so we're probably more likely to gently challenge our coachee's perspective when they're telling their stories, because we know that we can be affected by all of this other baggage, if you like, for want of a better word, life experience. So when we know that it's impacted us and we've been able to clean that up for ourselves, then we know that we can help other people to do it, perhaps, or there is a requirement to do it.
Yeah. So where are you on the idea of, as a coach, asking your coachee, what's your intuition telling you?
I think personally, despite feeling very connected to intuition as a topic, I wouldn't ask that question.
Whereas I would.
Oh, that's interesting,
Yes.
isn't it? That's really interesting.
Because I think, going back to what you were saying earlier, that people might have, on an unconscious level, knowledge that isn't readily available to them. They just have a feeling that something's not quite right, or that feeling that, well, this feels like the right thing to do. So I think actually when we talk about the 6 thinking hats, one of the hats that you might wear, if you're using that model, Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats, is the red hat of the emotions, the intuition, the gut feeling. Okay, so what's your intuition telling you might be a really powerful question to ask someone that's very much in the logical analysis and they're kind of locked in that and can't escape that. So what's your intuition telling you? And their intuition might reveal things that they haven't thought about because they're so locked in and analysing the facts, the data.
Interesting, because I would be more likely to ask someone to tune into their body and tell me how it feels.
Yeah, so that 6 thinking hats question is all of that. It's, what emotions connected to this, how is it feeling? And yeah, definitely the somatic stuff comes in as well. But that's part and parcel of the intuition, isn't it?
Well, yes, but what I'm saying is, I guess I wouldn't use the language. I wouldn't say, what's your intuition telling you? I would say, let's explore how that feels, and I'd ask them to see how it feels in their body.
Okay.
It's just a different way of asking the same question, isn't it?
Possibly.
Interesting.
So if you ask someone, how does that feel in your body, they might describe physicality, but might not be able to connect that to that unconscious knowledge, that kind of intuition, that awareness. I think they're different things, but connected.
Yeah.
So I think asking someone about their physiology is important as well. So I suppose where I'm coming from is, if we've got someone that shows up in a very analytical, data-driven way, asking them about their intuition will give them new information.
Okay, so here's the thing I think that's happening is my clients offer the information. They will, I'm just, as we're talking, thinking about it, my clients will say, I intuitively think this, so then I need to explore other things. Whereas it sounds like your clients are much more likely to say, I think this, and this is the information. So you're almost having to reverse their thinking. Tap into the intuition side.
I'm not saying that my clients do that, but if I was faced with someone that was presenting in that way and saying, well, these are the facts, this is the reality, logically, I should be doing this, then I think to ask them, well, what's your intuition telling you? Because if they're bringing it to coaching, there's a good chance they have some cognitive dissonance. They're not some ambivalence about it. They're not sure how to move forward when all the facts are telling them that they should go in a certain direction. So asking them what their intuition is telling them. They go, well, I've got this slight doubt about it. I'm not sure what that's about. Then you can explore what that is about. So if they were just showing up in my intuition is telling me this, then I'd kind of want to know what the facts are.
Yes. And so maybe that's why there's a difference in our approach, because I tend to not need to focus on intuition because people will come to me with that already.
My clients are all individuals. They show up in all sorts of ways.
So, yeah, I think at the start, we said we have very different opinions, or you believe we have very different opinions on intuition. I don't think we necessarily do. What are your thoughts now?
I think there's some common ground.
Yes, I think so too.
I think you've come round to my way of thinking. Sorry, I'm being mischievous.
You are a bit mischievous.
Yeah, I probably still don't go to that third space that you talked about of the magical thinking. But that's, it's just, that's why we're different. That's
Absolutely.
why we are unique in our approaches. And I know that among our listeners, you will have listeners that very much like that idea of knowing things that you can't possibly know how you know them. And then other people that take a different view and go, well, yeah, I want to deal with.
What to do with Tom? I don't get that.
No. I just want to deal with reality and I don't want to go to that place.
Yeah.
And I think there's enough room in coaching for you to be open about your approach. So I don't talk about that sort of stuff to my coachees. I probably don't attract that sort of clientele because I don't go to that place.
Yeah.
I'm kind of steeped in psychology and trying to understand the way that we behave as organisms. You come from a different background. You're much more spiritual in your approach than me.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is space for both of those approaches, absolutely, as we've shown. So I think the key with it, with working with clients, is to start with the basics, isn't it? And to start with that, providing that space, providing that empathy, providing that presence, all of those things that actually ChatGPT was talking about, but calling it something different. We want to hold that space, be non-judgmental, and notice what we notice so that we kind of help to shine that light and allow our clients to see different perspectives and different elements within themselves as well.
Yes.
So I'm very pro-intuition, but as I say...
I'm very pro-intuition too.
It doesn't have to be considered a vital element in the way that ChatGPT says.
Yeah. Something just came to mind then about some... there was that thing about gut feeling, and there was some judges in Israel. There was some research done around judges in Israel. They were parole judges, so they were kind of making decisions about who should be released from jail at the end of, or some way through their sentence. And what they found in the research was that the judges made more lenient decisions after lunch. So getting on through the morning, they get a bit hungry, so they go, send it back to jail. After they'd eaten, they were just much more generous in their judgments. So definitely some gut feeling coming into that. But...
Ooh. Or maybe they were just niggled because they were hungry.
Yeah, but once they weren't hungry, then they kind of made, I don't know whether they were better decisions, I don't know, but they made more lenient decisions once they were satiated.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know why that's relevant, but it just came to mind then that the reasons for us making decisions and using our intuition as they would be, because it's their judgment, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're deciding whether to release someone or not. Or a lot dependent on whether they're just eaten or not.
Yeah, so not as a static a mechanism as we might think, influenced by other things.
Yeah. Good.
Excellent.
Thank you, Helen. Enjoyed that. I say we have some common ground.
We do, absolutely. So there's some thoughts on intuition and intuition in the coaching space. What are we going to be talking about next?
Next time on the podcast, we will be talking to Anna Marie Watson, who is an outdoors coach and supervisor. So we'll be talking about why you might take your coachees outside and coach them in an outdoor space.
Yeah, so a slightly different approach to coaching.
And we like a bit of outdoor coaching. We don't do an awful lot of it these days. And I think that's like a pandemic effect.
Yeah.
That before the pandemic, we did lots of outdoor coaching.
Yeah.
It's faded away. Time to bring it back.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to chatting with Anna Marie about that. So fabulous. Thank you for your discussion.
Very much. Thank you.
And we will see you all very soon.
Bye for now.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.